So if there's no fingerboard there, you don't get much sound.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I saw you using some flamenco techniques last night. The rasguedo, I think is what it's called. The triplet. Is this part of your intentional like right hand practice? I mean, I don't know how you would even get that percussive stuff. Could you talk about like how you practice getting these sounds and using them?
Yeah, I mean, I love this instrument so much, and one of the things that really thrills me about it is that it's I can't think of another instrument that's quite this way. It's kind of...
You mean this instrument or the fretless bass in general?
Bass in general, okay. Just kind of bass overall. It's very cool that you have fretless and fretted. That's part of the appeal. But kind of bass overall is so cool because it's a melodic instrument. It's a bass instrument that does the bass function, and it's so good at that. But it's also, I mean, it's beautiful for melodies.
Yeah.
It really is a beautiful melodic instrument. And when you use the ebow, it's really... I mean, it really is a nice melodic sound. If I was just a composer and not a bass player, I would still want to use that as a voice. I mean, this is roughly the range of a male human voice. And, pizzicato's lovely too. So right, it has this bass function thing. It's very melodic, and it's not a bad chordal instrument.
Mm.
I mean, maybe piano and guitar are better for chords, but it's pretty good. I mean, you can really play a lot of chords on, especially on the fretted. It really doesn't do bad. It's certainly more of a chordal instrument than wind instruments are, where you really got to struggle to play any kind of chordal stuff on it. With a fretted, even with a 4-string fretted, you can kind of play any chord in a way. The way we kind of hear 4 notes maximum in a way, not really, but sort of. So with 4 notes, you can kind of almost outline kind of most of the harmony that you'd want to hear. But then it's also it's kind of halfway to being a rhythmic instrument, a percussion instrument, and that's so cool. And that part of it really thrills me. I've always loved percussion, and the bass has always been that. Before this instrument really kind of grew out of the upright bass. And the tradition for playing the upright bass rhythmically goes back really, really far. It goes back as far as the African diaspora in America. So the first people who came from that part of the world and played the upright bass in America played it in a rhythmic way that's remarkably similar to, you can hear recordings of, like the East African from Burundi, there's an instrument called the inanga. And if you didn't know that's what you were hearing, you would think, oh, that's Cecil McBee playing, playing the upright bass. So there's this long tradition of the bass being, largely a rhythmic instrument, and then progressing through Slam Stewart and those guys, and then kind of making the transition over to the electric bass, and Larry Graham and Louis Johnson, kind of developing that whole thing. But I don't think it's done.
No.
I think, especially with electric bass, I think there's so many different ways to think of it in that rhythmic sense. So I'm just fascinated by this, and I spent a lot of my time just exploring what this means. And stop me if this is going on too long.
No, this is great.
This is a passion of mine. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, so this instrument is very rhythmic, among other things. It's really good for rhythm. but what does that mean? Like, think of all the rhythmic instruments there are. There's drum set, and there's the timpani, and there's the congas, and there's maracas, and all these rhythmic instruments from all over the world. So is it like any of those? Is it like a drum set? And it seems to me it's not really that much like a drum set. Because with the drum set, you have 2 sticks and 2 feet. And they're not, those things aren't equal. The hands can do more than the feet. Unless you're Virgil Donati, I guess, then it doesn't matter. You're right. So it's not really like that. It's a little different from that. And drum set is also quite polyphonic. You're often playing sounds at the same time. That's a big part of it. And the bass doesn't seem to me to really be that kind of instrument. But what it really seems like is it really seems to be a lot like Indian percussion instruments. Mm. And so as I studied how those instruments work, I realized there was a lot of that to apply to this instrument. And so that's what I've been working on for many, many years, for, 20 years now, trying to understand how the mridangam and the tabla work, and the kanjira, which you play with one hand, how those things work and how I can apply those ideas to this instrument.
Could you show a couple of techniques that...
Absolutely.
Okay.
So basically, the idea in Indian percussion, Indian music, everything comes from the voice in Indian music. In our music, everything comes from the piano or from the keyboard. But in Indian music, everything comes from the voice. So that's the referent for everything that's done. So because of that, it's really a monophonic music. And that's true even of the percussion instruments. So they're thinking of a single monophonic line. There is polyphony that happens, but it's more incidental. It's not part of the creative process. And so for all the Indian percussion instruments, what you do is you define a set of strokes, like a particular stroke and a sound, and that has a monopoetic name, so the name sounds like the stroke sounds. And then you combine those in cells and then build those cells up in different ways. And so that's what I've been trying to do with the bass. I don't have names for all these sounds, but you can kind of see how it works. So if I just, regardless of whether I'm playing a note or not, at this point I'll just keep the strings muted. If I just do this, that's an interesting sound. I'm just hitting, what I'm doing is I'm hitting the string with my thumb. I'm allowing the thumb to pass through the string. I'm hitting the A string in this case, and rest on the D string. In classical guitar nomenclature, you'd call that a rest stroke. And that's an interesting sound. Now, if I do the same thing, but I leave my thumb on the A string, it's a little bit different sound. But if I do that stroke, leaving the thumb on the A string, that really flows nicely into this. So this kind of sound is a nice pair of strokes. So I'm already starting to work to this cellular rhythmic concept, right? And so if I'm doing that, maybe I could do this next. Go backwards. So then I have a little cell, and the cell has its own kind of rhythmic geography. You know, it has its own. It has a feel to it, and that's what's important about rhythm, is how it moves within us, how it affects our bodies. And so that's the critical thing with all these cells. And then the trick is, then I have a 3-stroke cell, and most cells are maximum of 5 strokes. Because
yours or in Indian music?
This is what's really interesting. So the Indians correctly intuited that that the way our brains work is we divide things up into smaller units. That's essentially what a brain does. It's an organizing device, and it does that by breaking things into smaller units and then building them out from there. And it certainly does that with rhythm. And so when a brain encounters a rhythm, it tries to divide it up into the smallest units it can. And those are generally 2s, 3s, 4s. And 5 is right at the limit where we're kind of okay with 5. We'll kind of try to break it up into 2 and 3, or 3 and 2, or even 4 and 1, or 1 and 4. But that's really the limit. And when you get to 6, then the brain doesn't, it says, no, that's not 6, that's 3 and 3, or 2 and 4, or whatever it is. And so that's kind of how this stuff works, is that's how we perceive rhythm, it seems. So that's how then you kind of work in reverse, so you come up with these sets of cells, and then you put them together in these various orders. But it's tricky. Very quickly you realize how complex it becomes, because if we have a simple cell like that, the question is, which of those is the downbeat? And really, any of those can and should be the downbeat. So you're probably hearing the downbeat. But if I should be able to conceive of it so the downbeat is any of those. So, or
that's the hardest one.
Yeah. And yeah, so I call these downbeat identities. So any cell that I come up with, I want to be able to play in all of its downbeat identities. So if it's a 4-stroke cell, there'll be 4 downbeat identities.
Could you show a 4-stroke cell?
Yeah, so a 4-stroke cell maybe would be this. So this is the same one I started with before, and then I'm doing the left hand. And then just 2 plucks with the fingers. And again, it has a certain feeling to it. That's what's important about it. I don't think I have a metronome. So that's that 4-stroke cell moving through all of its downbeat identities just by playing sets of 4 and then taking one away. So I do one 3-stroke version of that cell. And then it's moved through all its downbeat identities. And it has a little bit different feeling in each of those identities. And that's basically how it works. But it gets pretty complicated because there's so many possibilities to do.
Could you show 5?
Yeah, a 5 maybe. You could do the same thing in 5. So all I'm doing is adding a 3rd pluck like that. So this is. Yeah. And yeah. So
I have a metronome.
Okay. So if I do that in this is 16th notes in sets of 5. So it's cycling through its downbeat identities. So yeah. That's how it works.
That's awesome.
And then it's just a matter of combining them, trying to combine these things in different ways. If I move my right hand to different places along the string, then different sets of strokes come into play. So the positions that I think of, if I'm playing over this part of the fingerboard, I have strummy kinds of strokes I can do and tappy kinds of strokes I can do. But not so much, I can't do this kind of stuff very much here. If I'm in this part of the fingerboard, on a normal bass, this would be your basic slap kind of style, is kind of in this second position. If I'm here, that's pizzicato, and you have all this kind of sort of that kind of sound. And then back here, which I use a lot, is you have the possibility of muting with this part of the palm. And that's kind of helpful too, because often with the bass, it can be hard to keep it muted enough so that you really have a rhythmic sense. And so it's just about putting together these ideas and working with them in various ways. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There are lots of, the Indian concept is very, very old. It's thousands of years old, and so they've had a lot of time to think about how to put these various rhythms together.
Do you practice Konakal? Is that going on in your head when you're doing any of this?
Absolutely, every day. Every day. That's what I'm thinking as I'm doing this. I'm thinking, takatimi, takata, takatimi, takita, takatimi, takata. And that's kind of where it all comes from. But there are just lots of different patterns. Some of it, you just kind of have to know, like if I'm playing triplets. If I'm playing triplets and I play 5 sets of 5, right? So if I'm playing triplets, that means 24 beats. Like one bar is 12 sub beats. 2 bars is 24 beats. So the 25th beat will be the downbeat. That's 5 sets of 5. So if I play triplets, if I play 5 sets of triplets.
Should we do the metronome again?
I think my foot might do okay because it's pretty close to the mic.
All right.
So if I do 5 sets of triplets, sorry 5 sets of 5s in triplets, that's 25 beats, right? 5 times 5 is 25. So we'll start and end on the beat. And so that's, just lots of little things like that to know and to be able to feel so that it comes out even.
Michael Manring is not a bassist who stops, at a limit, right? So I imagine you have gone beyond these concepts in your own head or made them your own. What are some Manring-isms, aspects of this rhythmic practice? Obviously with the right hand technique, but is there anything else that's evolved that you've sort of made your own?
Well, this is fun because it's kind of wilderness, really. I mean, I'm not playing Indian music. I'm just using those ideas to try to figure out what I can do on this instrument. So it's thrilling. I'm an idiot at it. I'm just like a total beginner, compared to Zakir Hussain or Trichy Sankaran or one of these guys who's, comes from a tradition that's thousands of years old, or at least hundreds of years old, and has been doing it their whole lives. But it's really exciting to think that, these ideas can be applied to the instrument. And I work hard on it, but, I won't live long enough to get half as far as I want to go. There's just so much to do with it. It's just astonishing how much there is to do. And again, the thing that that makes it interesting on bass is this is really fun to do without what we would call, I guess we'll call notes. This is just rhythmic sounds. Awesome. I love it. I enjoy it. But then there's there's a whole element of it, of entering into that process, the pitches, right? So if you're using pitches, so I can be playing, theoretically, if I practice enough, I can be playing, there can be a rhythmic bass that's happening that has a set of subdivisions in it. And I can be using that set of subdivisions and using them in one set of groupings. And I can even be using a set of subdivisions against that. And so then we have like 3 layers of rhythmic possibility that's happening. Then you can use pitches as yet another rhythmic cycle that you're doing all at the same time. So you have these layers and layers of rhythmic cycles that you're using to move back and forth in various ways. So I mean, it's thrilling to be able to goose with this stuff.